So I'm here again with Tony Michaelides, Moments That Rock, his new book, and we're going to talk about David Bowie, a joint love of ours. Bowie has the hallmark of consistently having reinvented himself, kept his existing fan base, and got a new one. That's a remarkable feat that is replicated by a few artists in the world. I think Prince would be another one. Whereas the average one-hit wonder changes their style of music because they want a new direction and loses their audience. So where do we begin on David Bowie, Tony?
Well, we begin as a fan, I think. I was 15 years old, I think. In fact, June the 19th, I think, is the 50th anniversary of Ziggy Stardust. It starts from, and again, I mentioned the fun side of things in, I think in a previous interview, I mentioned I went to further education college. Well, we were both 18. I asked this girl out and she said yes. On the first night I went to pick her up, I'd just bought Ziggy Stardust literally that week. So I got to pick her up. And in those days, their mother used to throw you in the front room while she was upstairs getting ready. So the nerd that I was rifled through the record collection. So I pull out Hunky Dory. So the girl I'm waiting for to date for the first night has got the album before I've got. So naturally I married her and had 2 kids with her. I mean, what else would you do? So that's the first funny bit. And the second one was when I was at school, where I think I can use this phrase to the English audience, wagging it, when you took like time away from school that you shouldn't have done. And there was a place called the Magic Village. And we were going to see somebody there that night. And we went down, left like 4 o'clock and got down there early, and went down to the gig. It was only a small place, but it had a guy called Roger Eagle running it, who was also the guy who went on to book all the bands at Eric's and stuff and things in Liverpool in the good old days. And so the girl, like, she smoked cigarettes. So like I kind of, she was out of cigs. So I offered to go and get her some. And the night following, Mark Bolan was playing and Bowie was guesting with him. And Bowie came up a night early and came to the Magic Village, just him, without any band or anything like that. I didn't go to the Mark Bolan show, so I wasn't sure if it was a band with Bowie or him as a solo artist or just him guesting with Bowie, but obviously they were big mates. So I go for the cigarette. So this guy walks out, he's always been a good looking guy, but he wasn't a famous good looking guy, So he walks out and he gets chit-chatting to my girlfriend at the time. And he says, do you want to come inside for a drink? And she said, no, thanks, I'm with someone.
Well.
So I love that, like David Bowie got turned down for me. So the thing with Bowie is I'd been a fan. Obviously everybody knew like Space Oddity and Starman and things, but I just started to really get into his music and things. So I went to see him. They had a new venue in Manchester called the Hard Rock, which had Traffic, Lou Reed, Manassas, Zeppelin played it. Bowie played the 2 opening nights. The ticket is actually in my book, and we went to both nights, me and this girl, and it was a phenomenal show because it was like, the Spiders from Mars. And the thing I loved about what I learned about it all later was, the whole hype around it. Because I like the hype side of the music industry if it's done in a kind of very cool way, because you build up a level of anticipation, right? But you have to walk out onto a stage and be every bit as good as you should be. Otherwise, you'll never see those people again because you've conned them. And Bowie was that person, and with the Tony DeFries thing, which went kind of sour because of financial issues. And that's why Bowie's taken care of, himself since, with having actively been involved in all sides. And then I went to see him play the Spiders from Mars, the last show. And the band didn't even know they were going to split up then, He just announced on the Hammersmith Odeon that this isn't only the last night of the tour, this is the last night we're ever going to play. And Mick Ronson was looking around and going, what what? But that's what you were, referring to earlier, Peter, the fact that, it was like the next phase of his career. This was amazing. I loved it, but we're done with it. I mean, he could have done, some people would have done Ziggy Stardust almost like as a tribute band in the 80s. Bowie would have been bored senseless and you would have been seeing it on stage. He already had a lot of insane in his mind and stuff like that. So that evolvement of him as an artist generated curiosity for a fan that was a fan of, like, I wouldn't say ordinary bands, good bands, but they had, their formula was like, you had a kind of feeling what the next record would be like. But Bowie had like, I think he had that desire to kind of, and let's face it, Tin Machine and stuff like that were failures, but it didn't bother him. He just wanted to, I mean, even with Tin Machine interviews, he didn't want to do them as himself. Everybody wanted to interview David Bowie, but he did it as a band. He was just the singer in the band, type thing. And I think that shows immense courage and stuff. And it's what carried him through his entire life. Even at the end, when he met the woman of his dreams, he had time off to be a dad. Because if you remember when Duncan was born, we give him a silly name and kind of like, he wasn't like a dad, or he was a dad out of his face, his period with Angie Bowie and things. But again, even in the 70s, when you think of it, he created this myth of this alien rock star, but he became it. It became his alter ego. He was a heroin addict. He was constantly seen like off his face and drunk and this and that and driving the back of, his interviews, and this and that. But he nipped it in the bud when Brian Jones and Janis Joplin and even Kurt Cobain and, and Hendrix, all these 27-year-olds that are famed for the year that they died because they couldn't keep it together. We wouldn't be talking about this guy if he hadn't have done what he'd done and ceased Ziggy, because he'd have gone with the flow and probably within 2 years overdosed or something like that. Like, sadly, a lot of the other people did. Brian Jones was in the same mix, Keith Moon, the whole, drunk in pools, the rest. So, his ability as a human was beyond belief.
So there's two other things that strike me on this. One is the amount of what you could call preparation time that Bowie had, nearly 10 years before he hit upon a formula. He'd been to a monastery, all that stuff you mentioned in the book. And the other thing is Bowie, the 8-bar manager, if I could put it like that Bowie's been impeccably good at selecting people to support him who are better than him at their chosen art. And he isn't frightened to work with people that are, better than himself in certain fields.
That's a really interesting point you make there, Peter, because that's something that I totally agree with. That nobody, any time I've spoken about Bowie, obviously we both did things around his passing and I've done things since and everything from working with him, but nobody's mentioned like that, which I think is incredibly relevant because, 9 Inch Nails, the Pixies, these were bands that were really cool in the indie scene. And at the time, probably generated more curiosity than the diehard Bowie fans who would come, along with a few others where he was playing. But you're right, he wasn't frightened of putting a band that potentially could have blown him off stage that night, and he did that like, when he went out, when I toured with him on the Earthling tour, he played small venues. And, I remember vividly, we were playing Nottingham Rock City one night and he did an interview. And it was just amazing that he did interviews under my recommendation. I couldn't even believe that, because he said to me, if you think it's worth doing, Tony, I'll do it. And I just walked out the corridor and clenching my fist. I said, I don't believe this. David Bowie has agreed to do something under my recommendation. Anyway, I digress. So he did this interview for Rock City. And the presenter said to him, David, last time you played in this area, you played Aston Villa Leisure Centre to 30,000 people, 35,000 people. Tonight, you're playing to 900 people in Nottingham Rock City. He said, why? He said, because I can. I thought it was the coolest answer, in as much as Bowie was going out and doing festivals, if you like, in in Europe and stuff. So the money was coming in, but he went out and did small venues because he could communicate with the audience. And I remember going to the sound check at a small gig in Newcastle on a Sunday and getting there early. And one of the sound check numbers was Bowie like doing a blues number, and you might have to edit this bit out. It is a rude word. But he said, you've got the guy behind the desk and you've got the tour manager making some notes and this and that, and like the girl polishing the bar. And you got like 5 people in the room. I was one of them. So like you hear like the echoey applause at the end, we're all kind of applauding his sound check. And he walks up to Mike, goes, thank you very much. And be sure to tip the barmaid, you cunts. In a room with Bowie behaving like that, And even it's so weird because the way he makes you feel wanted. I mean, my story about getting the gig was, I love it still to this day. The fact that I got a phone call from the what was effectively the management company, Alan Edwards in London at the time, and Roxy Mead, who handled a lot of the publicity. And she phoned me like the day before the Manchester and said, Tony, David's on the road. We can't cover this. Can you do it? I said, do what? She said, can you go out on the road with David and organise all his press and promotion? And there was this pause, and I said, you want me to go out on the road with David Bowie? And she said, yeah. I said, yeah, I'll do it, you know. So she said, listen, you know, I'll send you the information, the people to contact. Just be there at 4 o'clock to meet such and such, you know, and introduce yourself. Because Bowie likes to meet everybody that he works with, right? It's almost like an appointment with the Pope or the Queen, you know. It's like you've got to pass, you know, the acid kind of, you know, background check, if you like. So I went down to, you know, I was talking to her on the phone. She said, do you want me to go out on the road with David Bowie? And she said, yeah. And she said, I'll call you tomorrow and we'll talk about the money. So you want me to work with Bowie? She said, yeah. She said, and I said, and you're going to pay me? Like I needed paid to work with him. So I went down to meet him. And like I said to him, we just met backstage and stuff and everything. And then the next day, he was playing the Royal Court in Liverpool. And I went to, you know, I'm not starstruck because I work with a lot of famous people. And he was doing like a sound check and they had this little walkout into the audience. He was sitting down there having a cigarette while they were doing the drum sound check. And I walked up with him and said, David, I said, you know, I've admired your music all these years. I said, it's a real honor to have the opportunity to work with you. And he said to me then, Peter, he said, oh, that's really nice of you, Tony. You know, he meant it when he said it. You know, he meant that, you know, my words were sincere and he appreciated them. You know, human qualities that you don't have to have when you're at that level of superstardom. Because people just jump to attention.
He shares that habit and that skill with Prince, actually, who would do small venues so he could connect with people in a better way because he could. And the other thing is there's some great stories about Prince helping old ladies down the stairs in Paisley Park, which he didn't have to do, but he had a real sort of empathy and humanity about him that is not commonly spoken about. So that's really important.
It's a real shame that it doesn't rub off on. I mean, you know, it can rub off on the likes of us, but I wish it rubbed off on. And I think having the opportunities to feed that real world education experience to people who won't have heard it should really act as an inspiration for them to think, you know, you can be nice and successful. You don't have to put yourself on this pedestal of being like deliberately awkward.
So I'm going to draw this part to a close with a recommendation to you. Obviously, people watching this need to read Moments That Rock, but I also interviewed a chap called Tom Hagler, who works at BBC Worldwide over here, and he's written an entire volume called Heroes. It's all about the people that went through Bowie's life, and it is a joy read. So I ought to connect you with Tom Hagler at some stage.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him. Yeah, I'd love to do an interview with somebody that, you know, worked with a lot of people that work with Bowie. I'm always keen to learn more and more and more about the guy. I mean, my book is coming out on a publishing company called This Day in Music, and they have a limited edition 500 copy release of David Bowie Odyssey. So I'm about to talk to the publisher about my book in about 2 hours. So I'll find out a bit more about that. But I have a lot of, you know, Bowie books and stuff, but I always find there's different things that you learn from. Can I tell you one quick story about a friend of mine, Paul Ripley, who runs the station that I do one of my radio shows for on Fab Radio called The Promised Land. And he had interviewed Woody Woodmansey many years ago, Woody Woodmansey. And he was talking to about the spiders and everything, you know, and things. And he came out with this little story. It's dead quick. He said he remembered being in the studio with Bowie. He said, and, you know, you wouldn't know what was coming. You'd do your bits and play through a track. And then David would just disappear, you know, and he'd go out in the room and he'd kind of pick up like a bottle or something. They couldn't see him, or do this or do that, and then turn a tape on in another room or something and make this kind of sound, and then come back and put it in the machine, roll the tape and play it. And they're all looking at each other and goes, how the fuck did he do that? You know, like he came up with this incredible sound just to put into a song that, how did that happen? You know, because he didn't go out with anything. He just kind of picked up what was ever there. Like, but you know, that experimentation in everything from creativity to musicianship to things he's like the total package. There isn't anybody that for me is the complete rock star apart from him. And he will be forever. Here endeth today's sermon.
On that note, we can be heroes. Thank you very, very much, Tony.
Thank you very much, Peter. Enjoyed it a lot.